The train screamed through the canyons of Planet Oronics, its metallic body slicing the frozen air like a blade. The ground trembled with every passing second, the rails quivering as if dreading the weight about to crush them. Wind howled through the jagged cliffs, carrying the sound of the approaching storm deeper into the wilderness. There were no cities here, no watchful eyes, no one to witness the life-or-death battle unfolding against the clock, no one except a lone human crouched beside his broken scout ship. Mark knelt in the dust, a wrench in one hand and his toolkit sprawled at his side. His plan for the day was simple: harvest minerals, patch up his hull, and be gone before nightfall. The land here was harsh, empty, and best left alone. But then he heard a sound that didn't belong. A scream, thin and distant, cutting through the wind like a thread of glass. He froze, his breath catching. At first he thought it was the canyon echoing the train's roar. Then he heard it again, sharper this time, and unmistakably a voice. Mark grabbed his flashlight and ran. The rocky slope was unforgiving, the ground crumbling under his boots as he descended into the shadow of the tracks. His heart pounded harder. With every step, the scream guiding him through the darkness. When he saw her, time slowed. A woman, no, an alien woman was chained to the center of the track, her body trembling against the cold steel. Her skin shimmered a soft silver blue under the faint starlight, her hair wild and tangled like strands of moonlight. Her eyes were wide with terror, glowing faintly as she struggled against the cuffs that pinned her wrists and ankles. Each cuff pulsed with a sickly electric light, biting into her skin whenever she moved. For a moment, Mark just stood there, stunned. Who would do this? Why? He didn't have time to ask. The rumble of the train grew louder, a deep rolling thunder in the distance. He sprinted forward, his boots clanging against the metal rails. She saw him coming, her gaze locking on his face with a mix of fear and desperate hope. "Don't move," he said instinctively, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. His voice was calm, but inside his chest his heartbeat was a fat war drum. He dropped to his knees, pulling his handheld scanner from his belt. The cuffs were military-grade tech, far beyond simple locks. Each attempt to override them was met with a cold denial flashing across the scanner screen. Access denied. Attempt blocked. The train's lights appeared in the distance, two blazing suns growing larger, hungrier, faster. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, sweat dripping down his temple. His hands moved fast, trying every code he knew. Nothing worked. He glanced up at her. She wasn't screaming anymore. She just stared at him with those strange silver blue eyes, as if she'd already accepted her fate. That look cut deeper than fear. It was surrender, and Mark couldn't let it happen. Not today, he said. He switched tactics, using an old Earth override protocol, a trick he'd learned from breaking into abandoned mining drones. The scanner buzzed, sparks jumping from the cuffs. One lock clicked open, then another. He yanked the last chain free and pulled her into his arms just as the train roared into the canyon. A beast of fire and steel. Mark threw them both off the track, tumbling down the rocky embankment. The train blasted past with a deafening scream, the force of its wind nearly knocking him unconscious. Dust and sparks rained over them as he shielded her small frame with his body, holding tight until the danger was gone. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing. Mark rolled to his side, coughing against the dust, and looked at her. She was shaking, her hair falling across her face, but her eyes were still on him, uncertain, wary, yet alive. "Hey," he whispered, his voice softer now. "You're safe." She didn't answer. She pushed away from him, crawling backward until her hands scraped against the rocks. Mark raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." He wasn't sure why he felt the need to say it. Maybe because she looked at him like he might be just another threat. The wind tugged at their clothes, carrying the lingering heat of the train. Mark stayed where he was, giving her space. Finally, she stood on unsteady legs, her gaze darting back to the track. There was something in her eyes beyond fear, a pain rooted far deeper. Mark opened his pack slowly and held out a flask of water. She hesitated, watching him with suspicion, then took it and drank, her trembling hands gripping it like it might vanish. "Come on," he said gently. "My ship's just over the hill." She didn't move at first, but after a long, heavy pause, she nodded. Together, they climbed the hill under the cold stars, both silent. He glanced back once at the track, at the place where she had nearly died. The train was gone, but its echo still lingered like a shadow on his mind. The cave was dark and cold, its jagged mouth opening like the jaws of something ancient and forgotten. Mark guided the silver-blue alien woman inside, his flashlight cutting thin beams of light through the dust and shadows. The train's roar was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of the wind threading through the canyon outside. It should have been peaceful, but there was a tension hanging in the air, as though the rocks themselves were listening. The woman sat near the fire he built, her back straight, her eyes following the flames as if they might betray her. Her wrists were still raw, the skin irritated from the cuffs that had cut deep into her flesh. Mark had given her a thermal blanket and a ration bar, but she had barely touched either. She looked like someone who had forgotten what safety felt like. Mark stayed across from her, careful not to get too close. He'd seen that look before, back when he'd worked border rescues during the early wars. It was the look of someone who had been treated as less than human. Someone who had survived by expecting the worst. "Varel," she said suddenly, her voice low and cautious, as if the word itself was fragile. Mark blinked, not immediately understanding. Then he realized her name. She was telling him her name, Varel. He repeated, softly, like he was afraid to scare it away. She didn't look at him, but he saw a faint flicker in her eyes, something like acknowledgement. Outside, the wind shifted. It carried a sound that didn't belong, something faint, like a whisper of movement through the canyon brush. Mark turned his head sharply, his soldier's instincts waking up. He had learned long ago to listen to the silence between sounds, the gaps where danger liked to hide. This silence was heavy, waiting. Watching. He stood, pulling his scanner from his belt. The device buzzed softly as it swept the mouth of the cave, but the readout showed nothing but rocks and dust. That meant nothing. He had seen cloaking tech before, the kind used by hunters who preferred their prey alive and terrified. "Stay close," he told her, though he wasn't sure she understood. She was already tense, her gaze fixed on the darkness outside. It was like she knew something he didn't. Like her senses reached further than his. Then it came, barely a flicker of motion near the rocks, too fast to be natural. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed his pulse pistol, aiming at the shadows. The cave went silent again, too silent. A figure stepped into view. It was tall, wrapped in black armor that shimmered like liquid metal, its helmet smooth and featureless. The hunter didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its weapon, a curved, blade-like energy tool, was already drawn. Mark fired first. The shot sparked against the hunter's shield, dissipating like water on stone. The figure moved, fast as lightning, closing the distance in seconds. Mark barely dodged, the blade slashing a scar into the cave floor where his chest had been. Varel backed up against the wall, her breathing sharp and ragged. Mark shouted, "Run!" even though there was nowhere to run. He fired again, this time aiming for the joint in the hunter's armor. The blast staggered it, but only for a moment. Then it came at him again, relentless, like a shadow made of steel. The fight was brutal and quick. The hunter slammed into him, the impact knocking the pistol from his hand. It skidded across the cave floor, sparks trailing. Mark grappled with the armored figure, every muscle straining as the blade came dangerously close to his throat. He could smell the heat of it, feel the hum of energy slicing the air. Then, without warning, everything changed. A burst of light exploded from Verril's chest, a searing, blue-white glow that filled the cave like a miniature sun. The hunter froze mid-swing, its body convulsing as arcs of energy wrapped around it. The blade dropped, clattering to the floor as the figure staggered back, smoke hissing from its armor. Mark stared in shock. Verril stood there, her eyes glowing. Like twin stars, her hands trembling as if the energy wasn't fully under her control. The power around her pulsed and twisted, alive, sentient. The hunter let out a guttural, mechanical scream before collapsing into a smoldering heap. Then, just as quickly, the light vanished. Verril fell to her knees, gasping for breath, her body shaking violently. Mark rushed to her side, pulling her into his arms. Her skin burned with heat, her pulse racing so fast it scared him. "What was that?" he whispered, though he doubted she could answer. She tried to speak, her lips parting, but no sound came out. Her body went limp, her silver blue hair spilling across his chest. For a second, he feared she was gone. But then he felt the faint rise and fall of her breathing. She was alive, but something inside her had awakened, and whatever it wasn't done. Mark looked at the hunter's body, smoke rising from its armor. This wasn't random. Someone had put her on those tracks for a reason, and they weren't going to stop now. Whoever they were, they would come again. He carried her deeper into the cave, laying her gently by the fire. His mind was racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. She wasn't just a runaway. She wasn't just a victim. She was something far more dangerous and far more important. Outside, the wind howled again, but it wasn't just the wind. Somewhere in the darkness, something else was moving, watching, waiting. The dawn on Planet Oronics was a pale, brittle, thin light spilling over jagged cliffs, struggling to cut through the dust and shadows that clung to the land. Mark woke with a start, the events of the night still raw in his mind. The broken hunter lay where it had fallen, a heap of scorched armor and dead circuitry. But his eyes kept drifting to Verril. She was awake, sitting near the cave's mouth, staring out at the horizon as if trying to read some secret message written across the sky. Her silver blue skin shimmered faintly in the morning light, but her expression was distant, guarded. There was no fear now, just a quiet resolve that unsettled him more than the raw terror he'd seen before. "You're not just running," Mark said quietly, crouching beside her. "Are you?" Verril didn't answer at first. Her gaze stayed on the landscape, on the jagged spine of mountains cutting across the horizon. "They said I was dangerous," she whispered finally. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a blade honed by betrayal. "They said I had to be erased." Mark studied her profile, the faint glow under her skin where the light had burst out the night before. "Because of whatever's inside you?" She turned to face him, her eyes like shards of frozen light. "They call it the core. A relic from before the Great Collapse. It was placed in me when I was a child, not by choice. My father said it would keep me safe. But the truth is, it made me a prisoner." Mark frowned. "The core. That's what lit up last night?" Verril nodded. "It's alive. It remembers, and it wants to wake." He looked at her with a mix of awe and worry. "So they chained you to those tracks to kill you. Not because you were weak, but because you're carrying something they can't control." She gave a bitter smile. "Exactly." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with things Mark couldn't say. He didn't know her world. He didn't know why a young woman with royal blood and a living core in her chest had been left to die. But he knew one thing: leaving her Here, unprotected, wasn't an option. We need answers, Mark said. And if that core's alive, someone out there will keep coming for you. We need to find someone who can help us. Or at least tell us what we're dealing with. Varel tilted her head slightly, curiosity flickering through her guarded expression. Who? A tech witch, he said. Kodariker. Lives deep in the mountains. People say she can talk to machines like they're pets. If anyone can pull that thing out of you, it's her. The way Varel's eyes narrowed told him she didn't trust the idea. He couldn't blame her. We don't have to like her, he added. We just need her. Before she could answer, the scanner on his wrist beeped softly. Mark froze, his blood running cold. Movement, not animals, something mechanical. He crept to the mouth of the cave and scanned the canyon below. At first, he saw nothing but the skeleton of the old track and the scattered rocks. Then a faint glint metal, half buried under dust, shifted as if breathing. Mark's hand tightened around his pulse pistol. We've got to move, now. They packed fast, leaving the cave behind as they climbed over the rocky hill. The morning air was sharp, almost metallic, and every sound, every scrape of boot against stone felt too loud. Varel moved quietly, almost like a shadow, but her eyes were everywhere. She kept looking back, her gaze flicking to places Mark saw nothing. He was about to ask when she stopped dead. They're close, she whispered. How do you know? He asked, his voice low. She hesitated, her hand brushing the ground. Because I can feel them. Machines. Mark didn't ask how. He believed her. After what he'd seen, he would have believed anything. They crossed into an abandoned valley, where the ruins of old war machines lay scattered like bones. Some were half buried in the sand, their giant limbs twisted and rusted. Others stood upright but lifeless, like statues of forgotten soldiers. Varel paused near one, her fingers barely grazing its surface. The machine's lights flickered, just once before going dark again. Mark stared. What was that? They listened to me, Varel said softly, almost like it frightened her. Not because I want them to, because the core inside me calls. Them. He swallowed hard. Then we keep moving. Before they call something worse. As they reached the far edge of the valley, a sound echoed behind them, a grinding, metallic roar. Mark spun around, eyes wide. One of the war machines wasn't dead anymore. Its head tilted, its eyes glowing with a faint, unnatural red. And then another stirred. And another. Run, Mark said. They sprinted through the valley, weaving between broken wrecks as the machines behind them creaked to life, their steps heavy and slow but relentless. Mark grabbed Varel's arm, pulling her up a steep ridge as dust billowed in their wake. He fired 2 shots at a nearby drone, but his pistol only slowed it for seconds. They reached the top of the ridge, breathless. Below, the machine stopped. They didn't follow. They just stood there, watching, like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Varel's hand pressed against her chest, where a faint pulse of blue light glowed under her skin. They're not hunting you, Mark. Realized they're hunting that thing inside you, she nodded. And they'll never stop. Mark looked out over the mountains, where the faint outline of a jagged metal tower rose in the distance. Then we don't stop either, he said. We find the Kodariker before they find us. Varel followed his gaze. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady when she answered, Let's go. They moved on, every step taking them deeper into the wilderness, deeper into danger. The wind howled like a warning, and somewhere far behind them, the machine stirred again. The tower rose like a jagged scar against the dusk-lit sky, built from the bones of forgotten machines. Its surface was a patchwork of metal plates, scavenged panels, and twisted scaffolding, all stitched together into a fortress that seemed more alive than dead. Strange blue lights flickered along its spine, pulsing like the heartbeat of something ancient and restless. Mark stopped at the edge of the rusted courtyard, breathing hard from the climb. Beside him, Varel stood silent, her silver-blue skin shimmering faintly in the waning light. Her gaze was fixed on the tower, but there was no awe in her eyes, only dread. "This is it," Mark said, his voice low. "The Codereeker's place." The wind whistled through the hollow shells of broken drones scattered around the courtyard, their lifeless eyes still glowing faintly like dying embers. Varel's shoulders tensed as they stepped forward. The air itself felt wrong here, too heavy, too electric, as if the tower was watching them. Mark raised his voice. "We need help. There's someone here who can remove a core, right?" The reply was a burst of static from an old speaker mounted above the gate. Then a voice, sharp and young, crackled through. "No aliens. Turn around before I turn you into scrap." Mark glanced at Varel, who crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "We don't have time for games," he shouted. "She's carrying something dangerous. Ancient tech. She's dying. If you don't help her, this whole canyon will light up like a war zone." There was a long pause. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, the massive gate creaked open. A single figure stepped out onto the walkway above them, a young girl, barely 15, her hair wild, streaked with metallic dust. She wore glowing gloves that sparked faintly, and her eyes were lined with dark smudges from long nights working in the belly of machines. "You're not lying," she said, staring at Varel. Her voice was quiet now, almost wary. "I can feel it from here. That thing inside you, it's awake."
Varel shifted uneasily. "I don't want it," she said. "I want it gone."
The girl tilted her head, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Then you're in the wrong place. Nothing like that ever comes out without a fight." Mark stepped forward. "We'll take that fight. Just help her." The Codereeker studied them for a moment longer, then jerked her head toward the gate. "Fine, but if it kills us all, that's on you." The inside of the tower was a maze of humming metal. Cables crawled across the walls like vines, connecting panels that blinked and flickered with streams of unreadable data. Drones hovered overhead, their glowing eyes following every step Mark and Varel took. It was both beautiful and unsettling, like walking inside the skeleton of a living machine. "Put her on the table," the Codereeker said, pointing to a slab in the center of a circular room. Varel hesitated but climbed up, lying back with rigid stiffness. The girl strapped her wrists and ankles with metallic cuffs, not as restraints, but as conduits. "The core will fight me," she explained. "It'll see me as a threat. It might even use you, girl. That thing doesn't like to be unplugged." Varel swallowed hard, her eyes flicking to Mark. He stood close, trying to look steady even though his chest felt tight. "I'll be here," he said. "You're not alone." The girl's fingers danced across a console, and the tower itself seemed to wake up. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating in Mark's bones. Then, as if sensing the intrusion, the core inside Varel responded. A glow began to pulse from under her skin, spreading up her arms like veins of living light. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Mark's scanner beeped wildly. He ran to the window, peering into the junkyard outside. The dead machines, broken walkers, rusted drones, shattered sentries were moving. One by one, their eyes flickered red. Their limbs creaked. They were standing up. "They're alive," Mark muttered. "Something's waking them up." The Codereeker didn't look up from her work. Not something. Her. That core inside her is screaming, and every machine within a mile can hear it. Outside, the first of the sentry droids reached the tower gate, its claws scraping against the metal. Mark grabbed his pulse rifle and took aim, firing a shot that ricocheted off its armor. "They're coming in fast," he yelled. "Then hold them off. the girl snapped, sweat dripping down her forehead as she connected a final cable to Varel's chest. "I'm not stopping unless you want her dead." Varel screamed as the machine surged with energy, the sound cutting through Mark like a knife. He fired again, knocking one of the drones out of the sky. But for every machine that fell, two more lit up, crawling from the dirt and ruins like ghosts returning to war. "Talk to me, Codereeker," Mark shouted, reloading. "How much longer?" "Minutes," she said through gritted teeth. "Maybe less. But she's fighting it." Mark glanced at Varel. Her body was arched against the restraints, her fingers digging into the metal slab. Her eyes burned with light bright silver-blue streams that looked both human and alien. She wasn't just fighting the core. She was fighting herself. Then it happened. A massive warwalker, a hulking beast of rusted steel, stepped forward from the junkyard, its red eyes burning like coals. It slammed a clawed fist against the tower wall, shaking the entire structure. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the lights flickered. Mark's stomach dropped. "We've got a problem." The Codereeker glanced up, her face pale. "That's not just any machine," she said. "That's a Sentinel. And it's here for her." The Sentinel's voice was deep and metallic, vibrating the walls as it spoke. "Return the gate. She belongs to the path." Varel's screams turned into a deep guttural cry as the core inside her surged to full power. Mark felt the hairs on his arms rise. This wasn't just a machine anymore. It was something alive, something ancient, and it wasn't going to stop until it had her. Tower shook again as the Sentinel struck, tearing chunks of metal from the wall. Mark aimed his rifle, but his shots barely scratched its armor. "Codereeker, we need an idea." The girl's hands flew across the console. "If she can sync with the core just once, I can lock it. Seal it so tight nothing will hear it again. But she has to choose. I can't force it." Mark looked at Varel, her face twisted in pain, her eyes wild with light. He took her hand, gripping it tight. "Varel, listen to me. You don't have to be their weapon. You choose what happens next. You." Her gaze met his, and for the first time, something like peace crossed her face. "Then I choose." "Freedom," she whispered. The core answered, a blinding wave of blue. Energy erupted from her chest, shaking the entire tower. Outside, the machines froze mid-step, their red eyes flickering like dying flames. The Sentinel roared, trying to resist, but the energy wave surged again, stronger, until every machine in the junkyard collapsed in silence. Varel slumped against the table, her body trembling. Mark rushed to her side, catching her before she slipped. The tower was quiet again, too quiet. The Codereeker stepped back, her gloves smoking, her expression a mix of awe and fear. "You sealed it," the girl said softly, "but it's still part of you. That core, it listens to you now." Varel opened her eyes, weak but steady. "Then it will listen to one thing. I'm not your gate anymore." Mark looked at her, his heart pounding. Whatever just happened, he knew this was only the beginning. Outside the tower, the dead machines lay still, but the silence felt like a warning. Something bigger was coming. Something that wouldn't stop. The night after the tower fell silent was one of uneasy peace. The wind outside whispered over the wreckage of dead machines, carrying the metallic scent of burned circuits. Mark stayed awake, leaning against the wall near where Varel rested. The Codereeker had gone quiet, working through the night to repair her systems, but every so often she glanced toward Varel as if half expecting her to explode with light again. Mark understood that fear. He'd seen the raw power inside her power that felt less like technology and more like something alive. When Varel stirred, Mark leaned forward, his voice low. "How are you feeling?" Her silver-blue eyes opened, glowing faintly in the dim light. "Different," she said after a long pause. It's quiet inside me, but not gone, like it's waiting. Mark didn't push further. Instead, he offered her water, which she accepted with trembling hands. She was stronger than she looked, but he could see the toll the core was taking. Her body was changing, adapting. It wasn't just in her eyes. Thin lines of silver ran faintly along her arms, like veins of liquid metal beneath her skin. "We can't stay here," Mark said. "Whatever that sentinel was, it won't be the last. The people who sent it, they won't give up." Verril's gaze hardened. "My people," she said, almost spitting the words. "They put me on those tracks. My father gave the order. He said it was the only way to keep the core from falling into the wrong hands. But he doesn't understand. I'm not their gate anymore." Mark hesitated, then asked, "What does that even mean, gate?" She looked at him, her voice quiet but steady. "The core is more than data. It's a map, a key, and a weapon all at once. It can open doors to knowledge from before the Great Collapse. But those doors lead to things that should never be awakened. And they wanted you to be the lock," Mark said slowly. "Yes," she replied, "but a lock can break. A gate can be forced. They don't realize it, but the core has its own will. It chose me, and last night, I think it started to choose you." Mark's breath caught. "Me? Why me?" "Because you didn't try to take it. You tried to save me," she said softly, almost like a confession. Before Mark could respond, the Codereeker slammed a panel shut, startling them both. "We have company," she said sharply. Scanners just lit up. Organic this time, not machines, at least a dozen. Mark grabbed his pulse rifle and moved to the window. In the distance, shadows moved across the horizon fast, organized, and closing in, the moonlight glinted off armor. He recognized the formation instantly. Soldiers. "They're coming for her," he said. Varel stood, still unsteady but defiant. "Then let them come." The first attack hit just after midnight. A hail of plasma fire rained against the tower's outer shields, casting the room in flashes of blue and gold. Mark crouched behind an overturned console, returning fire through a narrow slit in the wall. The soldiers outside were disciplined, moving in squads, using the wreckage as cover. These weren't random hunters. They were royal enforcers. "They won't stop until they take me back," Varel said, standing near the central chamber. The glow from her chest flared faintly with each blast outside, as if the core could feel the danger. "They'll burn everything to the ground if they have to. Then we don't give them the chance," Mark said. "Codereeker, is there any way to boost these defenses?" The girl's fingers flew over her console. "I can reroute power from the core stabilizers, but that might wake it up again." "Do it," Mark said. "I'll handle the rest." The tower shook as the enforcers deployed heavy charges at the gate. Sparks cascaded from the ceiling like falling stars. Mark could hear the muffled shouts of the soldiers outside, their boots pounding closer. He fired another shot, forcing one squad to scatter. But there were too many. Then, the core inside Varel pulsed. It wasn't like before, a violent, blinding explosion of energy. This time it was controlled, deliberate. The lights in the tower flickered and then flared, every machine turning its gaze toward her. Mark felt the hairs on his arms rise as a strange hum filled the air, deep and resonant, almost like a voice. "Varel," he said cautiously, "what are you doing?" Her eyes glowed brighter. "They want the gate? Let them see what it holds." Outside, the enforcers suddenly froze. Their weapons sputtered, their armor flickering with static as if the very air had turned against them. One by one, their helmets' visors filled with flashing symbols codes, languages too old to understand. The soldiers panicked, breaking formation, some tearing their helmets off and stumbling back. "What the hell is happening?" Mark muttered. "The core is speaking to them. Varel said, her voice distant, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Showing them the past. Mark looked out and saw the enforcers collapsing to their knees, their eyes wide with terror. Through their screams he heard snippets of something else, a voice deep and ancient, speaking words that made his skin crawl. It wasn't just showing them history. It was showing them war. The assault stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The remaining soldiers fled into the night, leaving their weapons behind. The only sound was the hum of the tower and the faint crackle of the dying fire. Mark turned to Varel, who looked pale, her glow dimming. "What did you do?" "I showed them what they were fighting for," she said softly, "and why they should fear it." Mark wanted to ask more, but before he could, the Codereaker's console beeped. She glanced at the screen, her face pale. We've got a bigger problem." Mark's stomach tightened. "Define bigger." "The core isn't just awake," the girl said. "It's calling out, sending signals. Not just to the machines. Here's something far beyond Oronics just heard us." Varel's face went still, her voice barely a whisper. "The Council." Mark clenched his jaw, already knowing what that meant. "Then we have to move. Now." Varel nodded, though her gaze was distant, haunted. "They'll come with fleets, with hunters, with everything they have. And this time, they won't just come for me. They'll come for whoever stood beside me." Mark met her eyes. "Then let them. They'll find out I don't walk away." They left the tower before dawn, moving into the broken wilderness with nothing but supplies, their weapons, and the uneasy silence of knowing they'd just declared war on a power that would never forgive them. The settlement rose from the valley like a fragile dream stitched together by hope and desperation. Human tents made of patched canvas stood beside alien towers carved from pale stone, their surfaces etched with spiraling patterns that glimmered faintly under the twin suns. Smoke curled from shared fires, and the soft murmur of voices drifted on the breeze, voices of many species, speaking in a dozen languages, but united in a fragile kind of peace. Mark and Varel arrived just before dusk, both worn from days of travel. Their boots were coated in dust, and their faces bore the weight of too many sleepless nights. As they descended the last ridge into the valley, the people of the settlement stopped their work to watch. There was something in the way Varel moved, a quiet, regal strength that made them step back with silent respect. Her silver-blue skin glimmered in the fading light, and the faint metallic veins beneath her arms caught the glow like threads of molten steel. "This place." Varel's voice was soft, almost reverent, as she looked at the settlement below. "It's different. There's no war here." "No," Mark said, his hand resting on the strap of his rifle. "Not yet." The settlement leader, an older human named Bren Aldrin, welcomed them cautiously. He had the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too many battles and lost too many people. "We don't ask questions here," Bren said. "As long as you can work and share what little we have, you're welcome." Varel inclined her head. "We will not bring trouble to your door," she said, though her voice carried a shadow of doubt. Mark glanced at her, knowing full well trouble was already on its way. Over the next days they tried to blend in. Mark helped repair the settlements, broken water collectors, and patched up the old radio towers that connected them to neighboring outposts. Varel, however, drew attention wherever she went. Children followed her in secret, whispering and pointing as they watched her coax life back into dead machines. When she touched an old farming drone, its lights flickered and it hummed to life for the first time in years. To the settlers, it seemed like magic. "She's not magic," Mark said when Bren approached him. "She's different. But she's not here to harm anyone." Bren studied him for a long moment. "Different can be dangerous," he said quietly. That night, Mark and Varel sat by a small fire on the edge of the settlement. She stared at the flames, her silver blue eyes reflecting the orange light like mirrors. "I don't belong here," she said. "You don't belong on a train track either." Mark replied. She smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "You keep saying things like that, as if I was meant to be saved." "You were," Mark said firmly. "At least, I believe you were." Before she could respond, a sound cut through the quiet. A faint hum, rhythmic and sharp, unlike the usual noises of the valley. Mark froze listening. It grew louder engines, moving fast. The first explosion hit just outside the settlement wall. Panic erupted as people ran for cover. Mark grabbed Veryl's arm, pulling her behind a barricade as a squad of armored figures descended on the valley, their black insignias gleaming under the moonlight. Veryl's face went pale. "Torak," she whispered. "Who?" Mark asked, but he already knew. The squad moved with ruthless precision, cutting through defenses as if they were paper. At their head was a tall figure in silver armor, his face partially hidden beneath a ceremonial mask. He pulled it off as he stepped forward, revealing sharp features and eyes the same silver blue as Varl's. "You've caused quite a storm." "Sister," Torak said, his voice cold but oddly calm. Varel stepped out from behind the barricade, Mark close behind her. "You gave the order," she said bitterly. "You told them to chain me to the tracks." Torak's expression didn't change. "You were a threat. You still are. But the council believes you've proven your worth. I came to bring you home." "No," Varel said sharply. "You didn't come for me. You came for the core." Torak's gaze shifted briefly to her chest, where the faint pulse of light glowed beneath her skin. "It's the last fragment of our people's power. Without it, the throne will fall. Without you, we all fall." "I'm not your gate," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "I will never be your weapon." Mark raised his pulse rifle, aiming at Torak's soldiers. "You heard her. Back off." Torak regarded him with mild curiosity. "A human," he said, almost with amusement. "How strange that one of your kind is standing between us and our future." "I'm standing between you and your sister," Mark snapped. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Torak lowered his weapon and gestured for his soldiers to do the same. "You can play hero for now," he said. "But this isn't over. The council will come for her, for both of you." He turned sharply, his soldiers retreating with military precision. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving the settlement shaken but intact. Varel sank onto a nearby crate, her hands trembling. Mark crouched beside her. "You okay?" She shook her head. "No, he won't stop. Even if I burn every memory of the core, he'll keep coming. They all will." Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll keep moving. And when they come, we'll show them you're not theirs anymore." Her eyes met his, a small spark of fire igniting there. For the first time, she wasn't just running to survive. She was running to choose. That night, as the settlement rebuilt its walls and the fires died down, Varel stood on a ridge, staring at the stars. They looked cold and distant, like watchers who cared nothing for the people below. Mark joined her, silent for a while. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. "Somewhere they can't follow," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "And if they do, I'll make them wish they hadn't." Mark nodded. He believed her, but deep in his gut, he knew that Torak's warning wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The stars over Oronics burned cold, like distant embers watching from a sky too vast to care. Varel stood on the settlement ridge, her cloak rippling in the wind. Days had passed since Torak's soldiers retreated, but the warning he left behind lingered like a shadow. The council wouldn't let her go. Not now. Not with the core alive inside her. Mark tightened the strap of his rifle and stepped beside her. "You've been up here all night again," he said. Veryl's gaze didn't leave the horizon. "The stars are restless," she said quietly. "I can feel them. They're listening." Mark frowned. "Listening to what?" "To the core," she said, pressing her hand against her chest where the faint glow still pulsed under her skin. "It's calling out. Not because I want it to, but because it's remembering what it was built for." The messenger came at dawn, a young Zelani courier, barely breathing when he stumbled into the settlement. His ship was scorched, his armor cracked. "The Council." He wheezed, collapsing at Bren Aldrin's feet. "The Council has fallen. Torak is dead." The news struck Varel like a physical blow. Her breath caught, and for a long moment she said nothing. Mark rested a hand on her shoulder, but she didn't move. "What do you mean, fallen?" Bren asked sharply. The courier's voice trembled. "The factions are tearing each other apart. They all want the core. They all want her." His eyes flicked to Varel. "They believe she's the last key. Some say she's the only one who can open the path." By nightfall, the settlement gathered around the central fire. Fear rippled through the crowd, humans, Zelani, and other species who had come here to escape the galaxy's wars. All eyes were on Varel. "I'm not your savior," she said, her voice steady but raw. "I'm not a queen, not a weapon, not a gate. But I won't let them destroy this place to take me back. What will you do?" Bren asked, his tone heavy with both worry and hope. Varel reached into her pack and pulled out the small memory core the Kodariker had saved, a piece of data older than any living empire. She set it in the center of the firelight, and the holographic patterns danced across the faces of the gathered crowd. "I'll give them what they can't understand," she said. "Not power. Not war. Truth." Mark followed her into the old radio tower, now patched together with alien tech and human grit. He watched as she connected the memory core to the transmitter. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Morell admitted. "But hiding won't stop them. They're chasing shadows of power. If I show them what the core really holds, maybe they'll see what they're trying to destroy." Mark leaned on the console, his expression thoughtful. "And if they don't?" Her eyes flicked to him. "Then I keep running, but I won't run alone." When the broadcast began, every settlement radio, every stray receiver, every derelict satellite in orbit came alive. Varel's voice, calm and resonant, reached across the stars. "You think the core is your throne. You think it is your weapon, but it is neither. It is a memory, a record of what we were before we forgot who we could be. I carry the truth of both our people and yours. The humans were not outsiders to our history. They were builders. We built the gates together long before the collapse. And together we destroyed ourselves. Do not chase me. Chase what you have lost your courage to choose a future that isn't chained to fear." The broadcast sent shockwaves across the Kazat galaxy. Some factions called for her capture, others for her protection. And yet, something changed. Across dozens of worlds, suppressed histories began to surface. People who had been taught to fear the past now began to question it, but not all were moved by her message. 3 days later, a fleet appeared in orbit. Over Oronics, an armada of warships, bearing the mark of a faction that saw the core as a weapon to claim. The settlement prepared for war. Mark coordinated defenses, using every scrap of old tech to set traps and shields. But they all knew it wouldn't be enough. Varel stood before the gathered settlers, her voice firm. "If they want me, they'll have to face me, not as a prisoner, not as a gate, but as someone who chose her own path." She turned to Mark, who was tightening the straps on his rifle. "You don't have to stay," she said. "Yeah," he replied with a faint smile. "And I don't have to breathe either. But I like doing it anyway." When the fleet descended, the sky over Oronics burned with fire. Dropships rained from the clouds, soldiers pouring into the valley. Mark fought side by side with the settlers, every blast and shout echoing through the canyons. But the battle was turning. Then Varel stepped forward. The core inside her came alive, pulsing with a power that made the air crackle. She raised her hands, and the dead machines scattered across the valley began to stir rusted war walkers. Broken drones, silent sentries. They rose like an army of ghosts, their eyes glowing a fierce blue, turning on the invading soldiers. The ground shook as machines charged, smashing through the enemy lines. Mark stared in awe, fighting beside something both terrifying and beautiful, Varel, the woman who had once been chained to die, now commanding the ruins of war as if they were her own blood dot by the time the last dropship fled into the atmosphere. The valley was quiet again. Smoke drifted over the battlefield. The settlers stood stunned, some in fear, some in awe. Varel stood at the heart of it all, her chest still glowing faintly. She looked at Mark, her expression unreadable. "It's done," she said softly, "but they'll come again. They always will." Mark stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll be ready, together." In the weeks that followed, Varel chose to stay in the valley. She worked with the settlers, teaching them how to restore machines not for war, but for life, for farming, for building, for healing. The children called her the Whispering Queen, though she laughed every time she heard it. Mark stayed by her, sighed, not as her protector, but as her partner. The galaxy still whispered her name, some with fear, some with hope. But she no longer ran from it. Years later, a train still ran over the rusted tracks in the canyon, but it no longer carried death. It carried supplies for the settlement, and sometimes, if you were lucky, a story or two. And if you listened carefully, you might hear the tale of a silver-blue woman who was once left to die, and the human who refused to walk away. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, her name became something more than fear or royalty. It became a promise of choice, of hope, of freedom.